Okay, let me find a better way to share this PPT. Why it is opening in slide share view. Can somebody else share the screen? I am facing an issue in sharing it. So, but yeah, I think that material is not that important, but yeah, Ranjit, maybe somebody you can share it. Ranjit, if you can share it. So I will explain what is a swap. So forward, future and options have been covered. Okay. So at a high level. So people who have not gone through that, please go through the recording. I will talk about swaps today. So swaps in a very basic level, they are basically, as the word suggests, you will swap one type of cash flow with another type of cash flow. So let me give you a very simple example. In the swaps world, the most commonly used swap is an interest rate swap. Okay. So an interest rate swap is what? There are two kinds of loans that are provided in the market. So when I go to a bank, the bank can tell me that I want, so I go to the bank and say, I want to borrow 1 crore from you, and it will be for 10 years. So the bank will say, okay, fine. I have two options for you. Either you can borrow at a fixed rate, which is 10%, or it is a floating rate, which is nothing but my repo rate plus 4%. So this repo rate is the rate at which the bank is borrowing from the market. Okay, so repo rate, you can ignore the word repo rate. You can say a reference rate. It can be LIBOR or anything. Okay, I will not get into reference rates today because that's not part of the objective. But yeah, if there are questions, I will take them. But try to read some little bit on LIBOR and SOFR. I will put some links here also. So basically the bank is offering me, and say the bank's cost of funds today is 5%, and they are saying 5 plus 4, 9%. So two options. So one is 9%, one is 10%, but one is, so the one which is 10% is fixed for over 10 years, it will be fixed. The other one is variable. So if the cost of fund for a bank goes up from 5 to 7, that 4% is constant. So 7 plus 4, it will become 11. With me? Doubts? Doubts? No doubts?
Clear for me. Thanks.
No, it's clear.
Okay, so no questions, right? So now tell me, why would I go for a fixed rate of interest?
It provides a predictability.
When you really don't want to take risk and you want a calculated amount of payment which has to be deducted, that's when we go for fixed one.
Exactly, right? What else? That is one factor. What else?
If I don't like uncertainty, I want my cash flows to be certain.
Absolutely, that's the same thing that he said, right? But yeah, correct. So that kind of ties back. What else? There is one more very important factor, right? So one is certainty, like if I borrow 1 crore, I will be paying 10 lakhs as interest every month. Oh, sorry, I didn't realize I'm on video.
You speculate that the future economic weather would implicate that the interest rates would actually go up and the cost of capital would go up in the market. So that's the only way why you would want to choose a fixed interest rate.
Absolutely, Vivek. Very good answer. So I was looking for that. So there are two key factors why somebody would go for a fixed rate of interest. One is certainty in cash flow. So he knows that for 1 crore loan, 10 years, every year I'm paying 10 lakhs as interest. So 10 years, So actually it is reducing balance, right? In a EMI methodology, every month you repay some amount of principal also. So your interest component goes down. But let's say you are not repaying interest principal. You are only paying interest for 10 years and you are repaying the principal at the end of the term for the easiness of the example. So basically 10 lakhs per month as per year as interest, and interest is also paid annually. So to avoid more confusion. So 10 lakhs per year as interest. So 1 crore over 10 years and 1 crore as principal. So I borrowed 1 crore. After 1 year, I will repay 1 crore, and every year I'll be paying 10 lakhs. So for this fixed cash flow, I will go for a fixed rate of interest. And the second reason is I believe that interest rates will go up in the future. So I want to lock in my rate. Is this clear to everyone?
Yes, it's clear.
Okay. This is the base of an interest rate swaps. If you miss it, you will never understand it. So if there are questions, ask me. I'm happy to answer as many questions as needed.
Can you just repeat the second point, please?
The second point is, Gokul, that for example, I believe that the interest rate will go up. So that's why I want to lock in at 10%. So I believe this year it is 10, but next year it may be 11. Year after it may be 12. That's my view on the economy. Obviously, nobody can predict the future, but it's my view.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
And Nishant, in your example, the way you mentioned that the company will repay the loan, can you please repeat that again? How do generally companies repay the loan?
So there are many ways, right? So in this way, the way it is structured is I pay interest annually. So every year, so say I took the loan on 1st of January 2020. Every year on 31st December, I'll pay the interest, which is 10 lakhs because I've taken a 1 crore loan. I will not repay the interest at all. After 10 years, I will repay the interest. So every year I'll keep paying interest 10 lakhs, and after 10 years, I'll repay 1 crore.
Okay.
So loans can be structured in a lot of ways. In this example, it is structured in this way for easy understanding.
Okay.
Questions? If you don't understand this, you will not understand interest rate swaps. None? Okay, fine. So now, as I taught in the beginning, right, what is the precondition for any derivative trade to happen? And swap is a part of a derivative, right? So it is a type of a derivative contract. So what is the precondition for any derivative contract to happen?
There should be two parties taking opposite stances.
Exactly. Dipti is answering. She didn't attend the class. You guys should be answering. But yeah, good answer, Dipti. So people should have opposite stand. So now tell me, why would somebody go for a floating rate interest?
Because maybe there might be some kind of inflation rate in the market.
Not inflation, Ranjit. From where you got inflation? Okay, it can be inflation, but what is the objective? So just compared to the fixed, right? So what were the reasons for going for fixed? So why would they go for floating? It should be opposite reasons, right? So what would be those reasons?
So the investors are expecting that the rate will come down over the years.
Exactly, that is one. So basically he's expecting that the base rate is 5 and his spread is 4. So the 4 will be constant. So but 5 plus 4, 9. He'll be paying 9 for 2020, but he's expecting that base rate of 5 will become 4 next year. So he'll be paying 4 plus 4, 8. And he's probably expecting in 2022, it will even come down more. So it will be 3 plus 4, 7. Clear, not clear?
Yes, clear.
Nishant, can they adjust? You have used two terms, right? The base and the spread. So the base would probably be defined by the repo rate and by the economic condition itself. The spread could also vary, right? The base could be the same, but due to some factors, spread could also be different over a period of time. Would that be possible?
Theoretically, yes, but why would any bank want to change their spread, right? Unless there is a lot of competition.
Yeah, I meant through competition itself, actually. If they have more number of players in the field and they want to attract more, account depositors or more number of loans to be given out.
Absolutely. Basic idea of economics, right? So nobody thought the brokerages will come down, and then all these startups came and they started offering free brokerage. So basically on 0 time trading equities at 0 commission. So others are forced to do it. So that competition is key, but unfortunately in the banking industry, right, if you see globally, it is very difficult industry to enter. Barriers are very high and the regulations are really tough. So for example, in India, RBI just doesn't give banking licenses. And I have been questioning why, but they just don't. So in the last 20 years, what Yes Bank got a banking license, and maybe a couple more, Bandhan and all. Kotak got one. That's really tough. Like otherwise, there will be 500 banks floating around in India, but they just don't give banking licenses. They don't even allow foreign banks to open. Like for example, Citibank, I have been their customer for 15 years. In Bangalore, they only have 4 branches. And I asked them few times, why you don't open more branches? They said, sir, हमको तो खोलना है, लेकिन permission ही नहीं है RBI का. So ideally, Citibank would have 500 branches in Bangalore by now, but RBI just doesn't allow. Today, the world has changed. Obviously, now everybody wants a digital one. But earlier, when people wanted physical branches, they just didn't allow. So there's too much government regulation.
Okay.
So that is why generally the banks don't reduce the spread, and also their cost structure, right? So bank has to pay salary, rent, etc., right? So they usually price their loan in a way that the spread is reasonable. So the spread usually doesn't change. The primary fluctuation is in the base rate, and the base rate is there is a very good website. I will put it here. But if you Google just say base rates around the world, it will come. So in the US it's like 0. I will put this. That will website should be with you guys. That's a very interesting one. So, but yeah, you got that right, Vivek. So it is theoretically possible to have fluctuations in the spread, but usually doesn't happen. And are you guys clear with the difference between the spread and the base rate? Any questions on that?
Yeah, could you just give like a small overview of that, or?
Yeah, sure, I could. So a base rate is a rate which is fixed by the government, at which not the government, the central bank of the country, at which they will lend to the other banks. So for example, let me talk. You guys want India example, US, Germany, which one you like? We'll do India.
Yeah.
So in India, the base rate as of now is 4%, which means if HDFC Bank goes to RBI, RBI will give them as much money as they want at 4%. Okay, in India, it is known as repo and reverse repo. So repo is at the rate at which HDFC Bank, I always get confused, but I think I'm correct. Repo is the rate at which HDFC Bank borrows from RBI. HDFC Bank is an example, all the banks, which will be SBI, everyone. And reverse repo is the rate that they get by depositing money with the RBI. So for example, if HDFC Bank keeps 1 crore with RBI, they'll get 3.25 per annum. Per annum is per year. And if they borrow from RBI, they pay 4%. So RBI also has that spread, but RBI spread is only 0.75. Okay, clear? Okay, no. Is this clear? So basically the rate at which the bank borrow from the central bank of that country is the repo rate. So for example, in the US, the Fed fund rate is 0.25. So which means that if JP Morgan goes to the US Federal Reserve, they will get money at 0.25. So they want $1 billion. They will pay, say they want $100 million. So the interest rate for 1 year will be 1 million is 1%. So it will only be $250,000, 0.25. Okay,
I have a question.
Yeah.
Okay. So now if the repo rate is down by say 40 basis points, right? It doesn't mean that the commercial bank is obliged to transfer that sort of benefit to the customer, correct? The RBI might just request them to do it, but they're not obliged to do it, right? So
Yes,
how does that affect the spread or the base rate? Does it affect, or if it does, then how? Yeah.
No, so few questions I got confused. So one is the first question. So one question at a time, right? So the first question is, if RBI changes the repo rate from 4 to 3, is the bank obligated to pass on that additional 1% advantage to customers?
No.
Theoretically, no.
Yeah,
but practically, RBI will issue guidelines saying that I am giving it a lower rate. You should do it, and competition will take over. So, for example, that's where competition comes in, right? HDFC Bank, Kotak. There are 5 banks: HDFC Bank, Kotak, Axis, and ICICI. Kotak and ICICI reduce it after RBI does it. So competition forces HDFC to do it. If still HDFC is being adamant, I will not do it, then RBI will say, "ठीक है, next time you come to me for some work, right? You are not listening to my guidelines. मैं देख लूँगा." At the end of the day, it is not good to make enemy of the central bank, right? Because the whole.
No, but the commercial bank can justify, right? We already have a lot of NPAs, and we are not looking forward to lend as much as you are expecting us to lend, right? So
No, that is different, right? So how much ever you want to lend, you decide, right? Underwriting is anyways on the bank. 1 second, I have got a visitor. 2 minutes, okay? You guys can think of your questions. But yeah, Siddharth, I'll answer this one.
Okay.
Yeah, I also wanted to add on this that I've also been reading that banks are actually all the money that they've been getting from the RBI, they're again putting back into RBI itself. So
Correct.
Yes,
what do you guys think about it? Oh, yes, please welcome back, Nishan.
So yeah, the question. So Siddharth, I answered your question, right? Part one. So they are not obligated, but then the central bank has many tools at its disposal to make the banks to its line. Or else if HDFC Bank, and you said that NPAs and all, right? NPAs is the bank's problem, right? If they have not managed it well, that is their problem. So they need to figure out how to recover their NPAs. There are many ways to recover their NPAs. That is their lax underwriting structure. So that is based on their bank's lax lending standards, right? So the bank will have to probably go to the public markets and raise more money through an FPO, try other things. But yeah, RBI cannot. So long story short, RBI cannot force, but they will try to use leverage, and competition is king, right? If HDFC Bank is not reducing interest rates and others have done it, nobody will borrow from them. They will lose the business, right? You lose customers, you know where you go, right? So did that answer your question, Siddharth?
Yeah.
Then you had a follow-up question, something.
No, that's it.
Okay.
The follow-up question of Siddharth was how this affects the spread, right, Siddharth? Because I was interested in that too. So when the repo rates get slashed,
because I know that the commercial banks are not obliged to transfer the benefit to the customers, but yeah, I was actually on the how does it affect, or if it affects, how does it affect? Yeah, that's also thing. Yeah.
No, so did I answer the question fully, or you have a follow-up question? Siddharth, you have a follow-up question, or you are done?
Yeah. So it was on the spread. Does it affect the spread?
The spread is on the bank, right? So every bank will have its own spread. So now RBI reduced the repo rate from 5 to 4. So the cost of funds for every bank went down to 4, right? Whatever they are getting from RBI. Now, the moment RBI rates goes down, the banks also reduce the deposit rates. So it's based on their own CASA mix, right? Current account, saving account. How much are they generating from current account? So as a bank, if all my money is through current account, I'm actually paying 0. So my cost of funds is even lower. I don't even need to go to RBI, because on current account, I'm not paying any interest. And I have 50,000 crores lying there. So my cost of funds is 0, basically, literally. So every bank's dream is to have a lot of current accounts. And that is why they really push that product. So the bank's own cost of funds is determined by not just the repo rate, but also how they have structured their own deposits. So now in conjunction of both, the bank's total cost of funds is 3.5%, and the bank has a spread of 4% to cover its expenses. It is lending at 7.5. And then again, different categories of borrowers, right? Some borrower is a higher risk. The bank lends it at higher spread. So 8.5, 9.5, 10.5, 11.5, whatever. The spread keeps on going up. So will the changes of interest rate by RBI directly impact a bank spread? Not at all. It is completely on the bank and the competition as to how the spread moves.
Okay.
Does that answer your question? Still any doubts?
Yes. No.
Any other question?
Nishan, just a follow-up question. So I can understand, I mean, just in simpler terms, I can understand that the spread that the bank is offering is more of its operation cost or the profit margins that the bank is trying to make. And the base.
Absolutely. That is what it is.
Okay. And the base is what the central bank is directing them to set it as, plus some operational costs, etc. I mean, if the repo is at 4, probably they would set the base itself at 4.7 points, and then the spread will account for their profits and operational costs. Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I didn't understand the base and the repo. The base is the repo only. So base is basically
not allowed to adjust the base itself to add some inflation onto their operation costs, like fixed costs, let's say. So
No, they are not allowed. So the cost of funds, so the base rate is nothing but the cost of funds. So in every country, the way current financial system works, okay, so I think I need to take a step back. I think that is where it is confusing for people. So that is why I wanted to do that session first before coming here. So, okay, so I will continue the SOPs discussion next week. Let's talk about how the financial system today works, right?
Yeah.
So let's go back 500 years ago. There was something called a barter system. Okay. So barter system was basically nothing but I grow wheat. Primarily, we were all agricultural societies. Okay. So I grow wheat, you grow rice. We make an arrangement that every 5 kgs of wheat, I'll get 3 kgs of rice. Again, basics of economics, demand supply. Some year you have more of rice, less of wheat. So 5 kg of wheat becomes 10 kg of rice, whatever. And then it was very much mutual between two people. So a lot of haggling, and that is what you see in most of the societies even today, right? People have this genetic that if you bargain from someone, you feel that you have won a battle, right? So a smart shopkeeper always gives the MRP or the first ask is always 100, and then he gives you for 75, and you think, "Arey, I bought it for 25% discount," and you think you won. That's what comes from our genes, okay? Remember, so economics, politics, genetics, all are interrelated. There is nothing in isolation in this human world. So that is how it was. Any questions on this? This was 1000, 1200, 1500 years ago. No questions? Now tell me a limitation of this system. Or the limitations of this system. There are many, but tell me the key ones.
It's not very liquid, right? It's hard to, for example, trade 100 kilos of rice in exchange for something else. How do you transport that if you don't really need that rice?
Exactly, right? So not very liquid, probably not very efficient, I would say. Yeah, not very liquid. Okay, let's take that. Yeah, fine. That is one.
It's purely based on trust. There is no regulatory body.
Yes, okay. Correct, okay.
The biggest challenge is that what if I don't need rice?
Yeah.
Yeah, so you can always exchange wheat with cloth or whatever, right? So that is not a limitation, right?
No, but let's say that I'm only producing wheat and I need cloth, but cloth merchant doesn't need wheat. So how am I going to purchase the cloth with my wheat? Because there is no central thing, right?
Correct. So no centralized medium of exchange. Very good point. Okay.
It brings quality issues as well. Like how do you know the rice you purchased doesn't have any defects or some stones inside? That's a very common problem.
That is not a limitation of a barter system specifically, right? So yeah, but okay. But I'm looking for one other key one which nobody is talking
Actually,
about.
wouldn't the market, I mean, in this system, wouldn't it be dominated by, the person who has a majoritative stake in a particular commodity? For example, if I am the largest rice owner in the area, I define how much each kg of rice would mean for a kg of wheat.
Yes, but that is the limitation of all systems, right? So that is how the today's financial system also works. But yeah, that's another limitation. But I think one answer which I was looking for, so in the interest of time, is scalability, right? Is this system scalable? Can you do large transactions with it?
No.
Right. So it is not at all scalable, right? So then we moved on to more of a coin-based system. So, and usually with actual precious metals. So we had silver coins, we had gold coins, etc. So this kind of did what? This kind of solved some of the problems. Like you had a standard system of exchange. Now, 1 gram of gold is equivalent to 1 gram of gold everywhere. So you give 1 gram of gold and you get 5 kg of wheat. You give 1 gram of gold and get 10 kg of rice or whatever. Based on that exchange rate, based on that 1 gram of gold, how much is it worth for the rice merchant or for the cloth guy? It became more standardized. Okay, so this was the evolution, the first evolution. But then again, this is not very scalable because how many gold coins can you store? So even if you have a big box, you can have maybe 1000 coins, but not more than that. So then we moved on to paper currency, okay, which is much more scalable, right? In the same box, you can have millions of rupees of paper currency. Clear? Doubts, questions, opinions?
Yeah,
But
so
what
when
stopped them from?
Facebook.
I mean, so right now when we move from coins to, let's say, notes, the factor you're referring to is uh, the density of the money itself, right? So in one transaction, how much could you move? So what prevented them from increasing the value of each coin itself and denoting that, what, from today onwards, each gold coin is not just worth 1 kg of rice, but 100 kgs of rice?
No, but how would you do that, right? Because the gold is worth only so much, right? So gold has an intrinsic value. Why would a rice trader give more than the intrinsic value of the gold?
I mean, if the entire society accepts that, the gold rate now means 100 kgs of rice, then you have already improved the intrinsic value of gold itself, isn't it? I mean, the intrinsic value of any commodity or any element itself is what society and the market decides. This is my understanding.
No, absolutely, you are right, but I don't know why they didn't do it, right? I wasn't born, so and I haven't had a chance to read that literature. But yeah, I'm assuming there would be some other limitations. But you have a valid point. I haven't thought from that angle.
Nishant, I can tell you what are the limitations. One is divisibility, and one is the movement of the gold. Right? It is not very easy to move the gold, but it is very easy to move the paper. And the another thing is the divisibility. It is not very easy to divide gold, whether it is really easy to divide the paper currency. Those were the two primary limitations why we moved from the token-based or the coin-based system to the paper currency-based system.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Namit. The divisibility makes a lot more sense because there's only a finite amount which at that point of time they would have probably been able to divide it, right?
Exactly. You can increase the value of the existing coin, but then the divisibility comes into picture. I mean, if you don't have the lower denominations, how you are going to trade?
I agree. Yeah.
And in that case also, how will they, I mean, there's no central body that can increase or decrease the value of the gold, isn't it? I mean,
that's true. Yeah.
No, central authorities were always there. So as soon as we moved into a gold standard or a silver standard, central body was there, right? Somebody was managing the supply and the demand of gold coins. So that was always there. So the moment you moved away from the barter system, you had a centralized authority managing it.
Okay,
so that is not a problem. So every Indian state like Marwar or whatever 500 years ago or 300 years ago had their own treasury, right? So the whole work of that treasure was to get the gold, right? That's why gold mining and silver mining was such an important occupation, that you mine the gold, bring it to the king, then you standardize the coins and all. Obviously the standardized techniques were as good as they were because of the technology, but yeah, the perfect standardization is every coin should have the same seal, same everything, right? So that's where the king seal and everything came into picture. So the standardization had happened, but divisibility is the thing. So, but then when we moved to paper currency, it was still backed by gold. Okay. So if I have gold, which is worth 1 crore, I can only print currencies worth 1 crore. Very, very important. Huh? This is what continued till 1945, which was the end of World War II. Okay. Then there was an agreement in a place called Bretton Woods, and that is why it is known as Bretton Woods Agreement. Are you guys with me till now?
Yeah. Or can you repeat that statement? That one statement that after paper was like currency was backed by gold. Then you told one thing that like one statistic. I could not get that. Like the number that you mentioned.
No. So this standard continued till end of World War II, 1945.
Yeah. Okay.
When you come to 1945, the whole world economy is gone. Okay. Europe is devastated. Japan is devastated. Asia is having its own problems. Europeans are leaving their colonies en masse without doing any transfer of power, like they did with our beloved Bharat. They left it to rot. So everybody was basically running away. So the winning powers of World War II, so which is basically US, UK, France, the USSR and China. They sat on a table and they decided that going forward, they will have a currency mechanism where US at that moment was one, the victor, and two, the war was not on US land, right? So Americans were very lucky. So it was not on their land. So they had the most powerful economy at that time. And they decided that they will use USD as a kind of a reserve currency where most of the other economies will be built around USD, and USD will have like a preferential access. Okay. And that is what allowed the Americans to have this 75 years of global hegemony, so to say. And that is one of the reasons they won the Cold War. Okay. Not because they had a better culture or a better theory, or capitalism is better than socialism or whatever. So they got this superpower to kind of control the finance of the world. Okay, very, very important to understand. And spend as much time as you want on Bretton Woods. I will try to give you a few books name also, but on Bretton Woods itself, there are hundreds of articles, PDFs, you can get whatever you want, read about it. Okay, very, very important to understand today's world. And people who don't like to read, go to YouTube. There are thousands of videos on what was the Bretton Woods Agreement, and it's again in English and Hindi. So you can watch if you want. I will give you some links for the ones I like, but there is tons of material available. So read as much as you can about what Bretton Woods was. Okay, we will do a detailed discussion on it in 2 weeks time. So on 28th of June, Vaibhav, just put this on the agenda if you want to make a note. 28th of June will be the discussion on Bretton Woods. Okay. And everybody has to talk, because some people don't talk in the sessions and they have to start talking. Is this clear?
Can you spell out the title, Bretton Woods?
It's there, yeah. It's there on the chat. I have put it so many times. So people are not reading the chat. I put it. It was there, like I have shared the Bretton Woods links from Wikipedia about 3-4 weeks back.
And
okay, thank you.
Nishant, would you like to add a little bit more details to this Bretton Woods? Like the world's currency were pegged to US dollars, and then US dollar was pegged to gold.
Was it like that? I don't remember.
Yes,
okay,
like
so maybe you can talk about it, Nimita. I'm not that clear on that.
Yeah, sure. In this, so as Nishant said that I'll add more to it, why it happened basically. So during the World War II, as Nishant mentioned, it was fought in Europe and partly in Asia as well. And America was, untouched with this. But what happened was a lot of these countries take a high, very high loans from America. And in order to pay that, everybody has to give their golds to America. And that's when everyone understood that, okay, this gold standard is not working anymore. We need to find out something good. Otherwise, all of our gold reserves will be gone to America, and we will be finished. So that's why all of these allied powers sit together and talk about this Bretton Woods in the Bretton Woods itself. And that's where there were, I think, identified 2 or 3 major currencies, and the US dollar was at the top. And all the other currencies of the world are pegged to US dollars. And I believe it was some other currency was there as well. I don't remember. And then eventually those US dollar and that other currency was pegged to gold. So eventually it means that every currency was indirectly pegged to gold rather than individual currencies getting pegged to gold. And then eventually this also changed when fractional reserve system came into existence, that Nishant is going to tell in future, probably in a while. Yeah, Nishant, you can continue.
Okay. Now, anybody else wants to add something?
No, I have a question for this. So when you say that it was pegged to gold, so ideally when you say that it is pegged to gold, then why not the countries which is having the highest reserves of gold, they are having the highest this thing, right? How does it work then? Like when you are equating it to gold.
US was still having the higher reserves of gold, and as I said that most of the countries took a high loan from US for this World War II, and they eventually had to ship their physical gold from Europe to United States. That's why United States was at a very, very well positioned at that time.
Okay, I'll read it maybe, and then we can maybe have further discussion on this. Yes. Okay.
Yeah. So Akash, you always ask the right questions. Okay. So I really like your questioning ability. Really appreciate it. I have been observing it for 2 months. Really hit the nail on the head.
Maybe I can answer that question.
Okay, Deepti, go ahead.
Basically, the concept of fiat currency or the paper currency is that governments should not print as much as they like. Each currency note reads this, the bearer, what does it read? The bearer owes the holder so much money in a real value. I don't remember what it reads, but it basically says that it's not up to the governments to print whatever money. They should have some intrinsic value or real value attached to it, and that was originally the gold. So the countries with highest gold reserves are allowed to print more currency. That means they are richer than the other countries. So like Nimit explained, as gold was moving to US was getting in real terms much richer than the other countries, and one day or the other the entire Europe was doomed to go bankrupt. That's why they have decided on a different standard.
Actually, I have one question here, guys.
No, Dipti,
understand
one second. You got that wrong, Dipti. So that is not what happened, right? So coming to Akash, Vivek, sorry to interrupt you. And coming to Akash's question, that was the thing. So he asked very valid questions. So Vivek, I'll answer Akash's question, and then that will kind of answer Deepti's point, and then I will come to your question. Okay. So Akash, your question was if it was pegged to the gold, right? So yes, after the World War II, US had the largest gold reserves. Okay, somebody can Google it quickly when I'm speaking, but it was almost 3 times more than the second one. Okay, something like that. So they had the largest gold reserves, and they could only print as much dollar as equivalent to gold. So for example, if the total value of gold is $10 billion, US can only print $10 billion. This is the agreement of 1945. Now, if US is printing only $10 billion, the money is always in circulation, right? People are doing trade, going to shop, buying whatever. And they also allowed the dollar to be exported out of their country. So some European guy could, so if the American bought something from an Italian, they will pay in dollar. But the understanding was that that Italian guy can go back to the US Federal Reserve anytime and say, take this $10 and give me equivalent amount of gold. This is the trust basis or the intrinsic value monetary system that was agreed. Is this clear to everyone?
So that's what I said.
Actually, my
where
question
was I wrong?
No, but you said about fiat currency, right?
No, I said the original gold standard, or even now the paper currency reads that it's not just a paper. It holds the value in terms of the government or whoever has issued it is obliged to pay as much real value. So
no, there is no more gold standard. So the US moved off the gold standard in 1971. So for 50 years we are not on the gold standard. So
no, I know, I understand that. But I said originally, see, any paper has value, currency or not a currency. A paper is differentiated in terms of the intrinsic value it holds. So that's why the gold has come into picture. I thought that was the question. I'm sorry, but that's exactly what I meant, what you explained.
No, but the gold standard was only till 1971. That's what I'm saying. So when you say fiat currency, there is no more intrinsic value. So for the last 50 years, there is no value. So today the euro that you hold, you cannot go to the ECB and say, give me back the gold. They won't give you. So today it is just pure speculation. There is no intrinsic value of the paper that you hold in your hand today. To move to the blockchain and the Bitcoin. That is what this Satoshi guy, whoever created blockchain in 2008, right? So that is when he realized. So that is what people assume, whether it's a group or a people. So even that is when I realized that when I started reading up because of the financial crisis, that we have been away from the gold standard for the last 50 years. And that is one thing that many people don't understand. Fiat currency means there is no more gold standard. So there is no intrinsic value of any currency. I'm just saying euros, USD, anyone, even INR. RBI can just print as much as it wants. There is no backup. So it is not that today RBI has printed 50 lakh crore rupees and it has 50 lakh crore worth of gold lying there. No, RBI can print as much as it wants.
And guys, it is very important concept. Guys, it is very important concept to understand that the money that you are holding as of today, its value is going down every day. As and when countries are printing more and more money, your money value is going down.
एक minute, इस पे आएंगे. So right now what I was talking about is 1945. So stay in 1945. So 1945.
I have a question until the 1945 itself, Nishan. So we said that all the currencies agreed to peg themselves against the dollar, which is in turn pegged to gold. But let's say if I'm a country where I don't have much gold reserve, so when when you mean that, since you don't have much gold reserve, you cannot valuate your country more than a particular value. I don't understand why countries should have agreed to it. So if my country has more amount of rice, maybe for internal transactions, I can come about with a currency and say that I will print as much as amount that is equivalent to my cost of, the agricultural produce in the country. Because I mean, I understand the relation between controlling the amount of money being printed to some kind of a actual commodity where they can feel and touch and add value to it. So why should it have been always gold? I mean, that's something which I don't understand. Why all the countries which are at a intrinsic disadvantageous position, why did they agree to that?
Are you talking about 1945 or pre-1945?
Pre-1945, or even throughout the history of time, I would say, until the time where people agreed that gold is our main standard of unit reserve throughout the world.
Yeah, so I'll have to go back to that history, but think of it logically, right? So I'm just answering it logically. The whole concept of paper currency itself is not more than 200, 300 years old, right? So the Chinese started it. So let's say, does anyone know when this paper currency started? It probably is 300 years old, not more than that. Okay, let me Google this.
Okay, I'll answer your question, Vivek. Why part? So you understood why the barter system was a failure and why the coin system comes into existence, right?
Yeah.
So the intrinsic value of gold was created because gold was a precious material because of its chemical properties, which
Right.
is it is an inert material. It don't corrode. It don't. So let's say that iron, if you keep on for 100 years, it will corrode and go away, right? But gold don't do that because it's an inert metal. The another thing is its availability is limited, not like iron, which is available in abundance. Its availability is limited. So that's why over the period of thousands, 2000 years, the gold has built that reputation in everybody's mind that it is not in abundance. It will not going to corrode away. It will not going to be vanish in future. So that's why gold has created that value for itself. And that's why that coin system, when it came across, the gold was the coin which was pegged to everything. And then eventually, so all these financial systems are being built based on the previous financial system. So when paper currency comes, it was pegged to gold. Does it make sense now?
Yeah. I mean, choosing
No,
gold
Nimit,
as a
but
value of material makes sense. But I don't understand how countries who have been at a disadvantageous position, who don't have enough gold reserves, did not come about suggesting any other material and say that, okay, for our internal transactions, we'll use this as our mode of currency. For our any external liabilities or transactions, we'll probably accept gold. So take for India, let's say they accept that they'll control the production of rice every year and they print only the amount of money that is equivalent to the production of rice. But any external loans or credits or liabilities with US or any other ones, they accept that, okay, we'll have to
Okay.
accept a gold standard.
I can answer that
International
question.
standard.
Yeah, I can. So basically, you are talking about the time of 1945, right? At
Yeah.
that time, most of the second world and third world countries are colonies of these allied nations, right? And the decisions were done by these allied nations itself. So they didn't went ahead and ask all those countries that what your stand on these things, right? So that's how these decisions were taken among these allied nations. And again, at that time, as Nishant mentioned, 3/4 of the entire world's gold was getting held by the United States.
Yeah.
So I think we are talking 2-3 different things, right? So that is why. So 1945 is different. So 1945 is easy to explain. But going back, your question is making me think also, Vivek, and I haven't actually thought about it in this angle. So thanks for making me think. Why did gold become a standard and not silver or copper or something else? Nimit said that gold has some properties, but the same properties are there in all inert metals. So
No,
even silver has the same properties.
So
right?
Nishant, no, there are not many inert metals available in the chart. So it's gold, it's platinum. Platinum came into existence many years after gold, and there was a silver, but silver was not as inert as gold. So there was no other thing than gold.
But then again, 500 years ago, say China had a lot of gold and it pegged its currency to gold. India didn't. Why would we agree, right? So there are limitations, but I think there was also one very important factor, Vivek, we need to understand that today the amount of global trade that we have, 1,000 years ago, we had like fraction of it. So if today the global trade is $500 billion a month, I'm just throwing a random figure. 500 years ago, it was not even 5. So the numbers were very, very low. So international trade was not that much. In fact, even in India, inter-regional trade was not that much. So whatever was produced in Marwar was consumed mostly in Marwar. In fact, it was even much lesser, right? Villages were probably self-sufficient. So there was not so much, we were not consumers, right? We were not, consumerism was not a fad. There were no TV channels, no marketing products, no paper ads and all of that. So basically those were also factors, but still I need to think more. Okay, I will probably try to research more how or why gold became a standard, and was it in fact globally acceptable. I doubt it, right? Because the world was also not very interconnected. So I don't know what was going on in some village in Africa, some different because the current country maps were also redrawn in the last 100 odd years. So there were a lot of other historical reasons, but for whatever reason gold became. But I will dig into this. Okay, I will figure this out. This will make me think.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, just to finish off one last point, guys. I mean, my point of view, my understanding was, if let's say you're completely cut off, you're completely self-sufficient as a country or as a region, and then you're not having any liabilities towards any externalities. Oh, sorry, you are protecting yourself against any externalities. Then the prosperity of the country is purely dependent on the efficiency of your implementations and efficiency of your cash flows within the country, right? Be it $1 billion or $1 trillion. So that's where these are the doubts I've always had. I mean, this alludes to even my earlier discussions on private and public blockchains when I was thinking earlier, many years ago. But yeah, that'd be interesting to know.
So we'll dig deeper, right? So, but 500 years ago, there is not so much material available, but I will dig deeper, okay? Because this is interesting, very interesting for me. I will figure something out, okay? And you guys can do your own research and come with different perspectives. Now coming to 1945, that was easy, right? So like Nimit said, everything was pushed down the throat. So the winners decided everything. So basically US, UK, USSR, Russia and USSR, China and France. These 5 decided whatever we will do, how we will treat Germany, how we will treat Japan, India and all were basically unko to kuch samajhte hi nahi the. So that is why I shared that article on Mr. Churchill, right? He is responsible for 5 million deaths in India. So how is he any better than Hitler? And he in fact said, the white man's burden, the white man has to educate, the white man has to rule and all of that nonsense. So anyways, but still Mr. Boris Johnson says he was a war hero. So I don't know why he was a hero. So that is why the world treats some people better than others. And I don't necessarily agree to that. So
I would
yeah,
say the world treats some criminals better than others.
Yeah, and in fact, Hitler was lesser of a criminal than Churchill and Stalin. So if I have to rank the criminals, I would rank Hitler way better than Churchill, Stalin, and a lot of others, right? So read about this guy, right? Timur. He actually killed 20% of the world population in his time. So that guy was really mad. And in Hindi we call him Timur the Langda, right? The lame Timur. That was a crazy guy. He basically wiped out populations of Turkey and some of those countries. But yeah, so I think very interesting discussion. We are over time. So any questions on what all we discussed? And then we will continue this. So we are in 1945 still, okay? These winners are deciding and they are fixing the gold standard. So gold is pegged to the gold standard, which means anytime I can give $50 to the US government and take back my gold, whatever the $50, how much ever gold that buys. So it was always convertible to gold from 1945 till 1971. Okay, when Mr. Nixon did a drama. We will talk about that drama in the next class.
Shant, I have a small question here.
Yeah, go on.
What if US keep printing the money to lend the money to other countries?
Means which money they can print? As of today?
Not today, back in the days. What if people are asking money from the US and they start printing? I don't. It can lead into risk, right?
No, they cannot write. If they are on a gold standard, as I said, if you have say 1 kg of gold is equal to $500, example, and I have 100 kg of gold. I can only print $50,000. I cannot print a single more, because when people come back with the dollar, I have to return the gold, right? So it is strictly limited to the amount of gold I have. They cannot print even a single dollar more. So they were not printing more than that. They could not do it till 1971.
And maybe one thought exercise, guys. So I mean, pegging the amount of printability of the money towards any element, was it to protect the buyer and seller in terms of give them some assurance that okay, your transaction is being valued with some backing, or why did they even have to think that the transaction has to be valued?
Because it has to have exactly right. So you only answered your own question. So it has to be valued. So now as a person who is trading in paper, it will not just be a piece of paper, right? I know that if I need, I can go and instead of $500, I can get back my gold. So it had that confidence to build the confidence. It's like a CBM, confidence building measure.
Yeah, I understand. I think alluding to what you, Deepti and Nimit told. So if I was in 1945, pre-1945, and I don't like my dollar bill, I should be able to walk up to the reserve and say, hey, I don't like this bill. Please give me $1 worth of gold.
Absolutely. And also remember that in those days, people were still doing bartering also. So if I had 100 grams of gold, I was always exchanging my gold with other people for other things. I was not always using paper. The system was not so evolved, right? There was no electronics, no computers, no UPIs. See, in the last, so I will come to that. So these questions are so interesting that we kind of deviate from the topic. But basically what has happened in the last 40-50 years is, right, we have made capital very easily fungible, which means capital moves really fast. It was not so 50 years ago. Capital used to take a lot of time to move. But in terms of economics, we have 4 factors. We have land, labor, capital. So I should have done this economic class also. So you have 4 factors of production in economics: land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship. Okay. Out of the 4, capital has become very fungible. Land cannot be moved, so it is fixed. Labor is also movable, but labor is not as fungible because countries are afraid, right? People are seen. Money just moves, but people are seen. So Indians working in Europe, or Europeans working in Asia, or Americans working in Asia, there is a lot of resistance. And now we are seeing the reversal of everything. So we'll probably go back to 1970. And that's my bet at least. So, but yeah, so labor is not, it can be, but it is not so flexible. Same with entrepreneurship. Businessmen are not allowed to move around freely. They still have better flexibility than labor, but they are still less than capital, and land is not at all flexible. So these are the other challenges of the capitalistic world. And capital itself was made very, very easily flexible. That is what was done over the last 40-50 years with this US hegemony, that they made money movement very easy. But yeah, I will end this class now because I'm really tired. I have been on call for more than 3 hours. So I will end this call now. We will continue this in our next session on Saturday. Okay. Anything else? Any last thoughts if people want to add, or somebody else wants to speak, they can speak. I am done. I'm too tired.
So one point I want to say that until the 1971, this Bretton Woods thing, which was said that after this, the money cannot exchange to gold. So does that mean till 1971, the amount of money available in the whole world was equal to the amount of gold which was available? Like everything was equated to the gold?
Absolutely, yes. So total money in circulation in the world in 1971 was equal to the total amount of gold reserves.
And Akash, one thing over here, the Bretton Woods happened in 1944 or 1945. So that agreement happened, and that went from 1944 or 1945 up till 1971. So the Bretton Woods agreement didn't happen on 1971, just to clarify.
Okay. Maybe we can talk about this in future session. So, but one thing is that, as you said, that right now we don't have any intrinsic value to the currency which we have. Let's say whatever cash we have or coins. So then why do coins still exist? I mean, if you are considering about divisibility or denominations, why are we not making it of paper? Because making it of paper would be much more cheaper than having, let's say, steel coins or whatever coins. So why do stock coins still exist?
Can I
Is it
pitch in
clear?
and say something? So I believe there is intrinsic value of money still, right? So the intrinsic value of money that we hold is based on the US dollar, right?
No, that's
So
not
now,
right.
if the RBI has $500 billion of reserve, then they can print that much amount of rupees, right?
That's
No, no,
not,
no, no,
that's
no.
not correct. That's not
Not
correct.
at all. Not at all. Not
No?
at all. Not at all. There is no more intrinsic value. You are completely mistaken. Last time also I tried to explain this. Okay, I have to end this because if people ask, I have to answer, and I'm having a
I can
really sore throat. But
I can answer
this
that
last
question. I can
Okay,
answer that question. Yeah. So Siddharth,
Okay.
I'll give you an
Yeah.
example, and you're going to understand that no fiat currency in world today have any intrinsic value. Take an example of Zimbabwe. Take an example of Venezuela. They were completely based on the oil-based economy. When the oil prices went down, they
एक मिनट उसको फिएट करेंसी समझाने से पहले ना आई थिंक उसको ये कंफ्यूजन है कि जो रिजर्व हम रखते हैं वो क्यों रखते हैं उसको वो समझा कि रिजर्व का रीजन क्या है
okay.
Sorry
Reserve.
if
Yeah.
somebody doesn't understand Hindi, okay, I switch to Hindi. Make him understand the value why we keep reserves. Okay, I think he's confused with keeping reserves in the dollars and euros and the intrinsic value.
Okay, so I'll come on to that, and Nishant, probably you can add that if I'm wrong. So basically, the foreign reserve that any country have is generally in terms of United States dollars, because the most of the trade that happen across the world is in the US dollar. So every country wants to have their hedging against this, and they want to have these reserves to basically have the surplus amount for the foreign trading perspective. Because the US is the biggest consumer in the world, and I think there are certain agreements where it is being mandated that all the trade, right now it's not true, but yeah, still I think most of the trade happens in the US dollars only.
Yeah, so there are reasons to it, right? It is one because of habit, one because of the agreements that US negotiated, and one because of the demand supply chain. But basically, Siddharth, to answer your question, and I will end this after this. If you guys want to continue without me. So to answer your question, right, reserves are a totally different concept. Any country has to have, or usually there is a rule of thumb that whatever is my import bill for a month, I should have 6 months worth of import as my reserve. So India's imports, I don't know the latest figure, but it is around $50 billion. So as a rule of thumb, RBI will try to keep 6 months worth of reserves. So $300 billion they will try to keep reserves. Now reserves are not in dollars only. So today RBI's reserves are in dollars. It's in euro, it's in JPY, and it's in CNY.
Correct.
Now, when the trading happens, and this is what I have been saying for a long time, you can trade in any currency. But for example, I am an importer and I want to import something from a vendor in US. I can either pay him in dollars or I can also pay him in rupees. But we cannot pay in rupees because our government doesn't allow something called a full capital account convertibility. Okay. So I'm just throwing random words out here, but we will cover this in future sessions. So that is why it is easier as an importer to pay in dollars than in rupees. So that is why I pay them in dollars. And to pay them in dollars, I need dollars. And for that, RBI maintains dollars. So anytime I need, I give rupees to RBI and RBI gives me dollars. That is how the supply is controlled. But there is nothing stopping me from trading with a European vendor. So say I want to buy something from a person in Germany, I can always pay him in euros. I need not pay him in dollars. So we can always agree that, okay, for this trade, this much euros is the cost, this much dollar is the cost, and this much rupee is the cost.
Okay.
And RBI gets the money from the investments that are done in the country?
Sorry?
Yeah, so I'm asking that RBI gets the dollar bills from the investments that are done in the country, or how do they generate the dollar bills then?
So the dollar is created by many ways, right? So people export, right? So all these IT service companies, they export, they get in dollars. When you travel abroad, right? When I travel abroad, I get funding in dollars. I bring those dollars and I sell it, right, in a currency exchange. Because in India, I can't trade in dollars. I can only trade in rupees. But yeah, this will continue for very long. I'm too tired. We will continue this next session. Okay, keep your questions coming. Good questions, great energy. Type them out on a Word document. whatever makes it easy for you to remember, and then shoot it to me next class. I have to go now. Okay,
Okay,
bye
thank
bye.
you. Thank you. Bye.
Okay, guys. Yeah. Thanks, Nimit. Thanks,
Thank
guys.
you. Thanks
Yeah,
everyone.
Thanks,
bye.
Nishant.
And Siddharth, if you can stay,